All right, welcome back inside our proactive newsroom. And joining me now is Kevin Carter. He is the founder and chief investment officer at EMQQ Global and the INQQ Fund as well. And Kevin, great to see you again. How are you?
I'm great, Steve. Great to be back.
Yeah, lots of stuff to talk about. You and I get together and we talk about sort of emerging trends, and that's what we're seeing in the last 10 years or so. Very little return by the S&P 500 led by US techs, but are those emerging markets really starting to take the next step forward? And maybe you can sort of explain how this all fits together.
Sure. Well, historically, when emerging markets do well, the S&P and the U.S. equities don't do as well. So there's been, histories of outperformance, usually 5, 6, 7, 8 years. But the last 10 years, the S&P 500's, been really the only game in town, and it's done great. And emerging markets have basically gone nowhere. But there's, I think, a lot of people that believe that maybe a rotation is starting in emerging markets, and certainly this year, the S&P's up, maybe 1%, while the emerging markets are up 10, and the EMQQ, the emerging markets internet sector, is up about 20%. So, knock on wood, but it feels like maybe EM's going to come back in favor.
So tell me about the case for emerging markets. What sort of do you tell people when they ask you about them?
Well, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, emerging markets have most of the world's people, 85% of the world's population. They're younger, and so the average age is considerably less. So it's about 90% of the future as measured by people under the age of 30. Their economies are growing faster. They're now bigger than the developed world economy, certainly on a purchasing power basis. And that's driving the big story, which is 6.5 billion new consumers that want all the stuff we have. So, that's the case for emerging markets. But as mentioned, investors have been somewhat disappointed over the last 10 years.
Yeah, a big focus of that is on technology, specifically the internet. And you mentioned a lot of those countries that are emerging want what we have, which is a pretty strong internet. So, talk to me a bit about that and sort of the companies that are trying to take advantage of that.
Sure. Well, the base thing that they want is, more food, better clothing, air conditioners, appliances. They want to take vacations. They want an automobile, and they want their kids to go to college. And so that's the kind of thing that, people should be focused on. But what I realized 11 years ago was that all those people didn't have computers yet, and they were going to get computers, and not a desktop computer. We're talking about Android-based smartphones, which are sweeping the planet. And so, we've had computers for a long time. We've had the internet for a long time, but all of these emerging market consumers, they're getting their first computer ever. It's an increasingly affordable Android-based smartphone. In India now, for example, you can get a brand new smartphone for as little as $12. And when they get that first, pocket-sized supercomputer, they're also getting the internet for the first time. And these people have never had bank accounts. There's no Target stores. And so they're leapfrogging and in many ways are more digital than we are. So that the real story in emerging markets is the smartphone enabled consumer, which is, I think, the biggest story on the planet right now.
So is it the phone companies? Is it the companies providing the technology for the phones, the internet companies? Which ones do you see are the ones that are sort of the wave here?
Well, it's the same kind of things we've seen, in our world. It's the FANG stocks of emerging markets. And so it's, in China, you have Tencent and WeChat, which is their social network, but really more of a super app. Imagine if, you could also do your banking at Facebook or Instagram, which is, what WeChat is kind of like. In India, it's, food delivery. The DoorDash of India is an incredibly fascinating company called Eternal, formerly known as Zomato. So those are the kind of things. A new bank in Brazil, online bank for consumers that now has 100 million users. So it's the consumer focused internet companies that I think are the real play, and that's what we focus on.
Okay, let's talk trade, and it's more specifically trade war. I mean, everyone around the world is talking about it. How is that affecting emerging markets, do you feel?
Well, it's like a lot of the things in the last few months. It's some days it looks really good, some days it looks really bad. But the trade war first and foremost is really about China, and China is, or the largest part of this story. And what I've said since January is that I think that Donald Trump wants to make a big, grand deal with China. And over the weekend we had incredibly fast progress in Geneva when the U.S. and China got together. And as Donald Trump said, over the last few days, he's trying to do a great reset with China. So I think that the China front actually looks pretty good right now. Again, things can change quickly, but directionally it looks good. And India was one of the first to come to Washington and put in place the framework for a deal. So it's still TBD, but right now I think that investors should be pretty optimistic about the Chinese internet companies because they remain very cheap. All of the things that have been hanging over them, the delisting threat, the tech crackdown, those are all gone. And now you may see a change in the U.S.-China relationship that it may not be warm and fuzzy, but compared to where it's been, I think it could be, a huge improvement. And I guess more importantly, that the companies we're focused on, they're not really involved with exporting. So to the extent the tariffs are affecting these places, it shouldn't directly affect people getting smartphones and going online and communicating with their friends and using their phones to pay for things. That really shouldn't change.
Fascinating stuff. Kevin, thanks very much. Love having you on. Great insight as always, and appreciate your time.
All right. Thanks for having me.
All right, Kevin Carter, the founder and chief investment officer at EMQQ Global.